Three. My name is Dave Pankonin, and our family, the Pankonin family, has been involved as either an international harvester dealer or a case ICE dealer in the agricultural equipment business since 1883. That's 5 generations, father to son, direct descendants. That makes it very unusual, and probably the oldest dealership in the agricultural business in the United States in that form. There's a dealership in Central City, Nebraska that's a few years older, but it had uncles and cousins and that sort of thing, where ours is directly father to son, 5 times repeated, which is unusual. I'm with Von Allen, who I've met from the International Harvester days when he called on our dealership as a service representative and knew through the days when the company was one, and at the time when the company changed in 1985, Von went on the truck side, but we've kept in contact, and I appreciate him being interested in pursuing the history of the harvester company and this industry, which is very interesting. And he's one of the many people that we've met along the way that we've enjoyed and had relationships with. And so it's a pleasure to be with Von today, and I appreciate his work in preserving this history. He has come with a set of questions that I think I'm going to refer to because they were well thought out, and I think will help keep us on the path of what we're trying to do. One of the second question out of the list, the first one was a brief recap on the history and the years, was share an interesting story about your father or grandfather, and that reflects their approach to the business. And I think that is a good question. I didn't know my great-grandfather Herman, who started the business, was involved from 1883 to 1910 and passed away before I was born. But my grandfather Charles and my father Charles Elwood Pankonin, I knew them both, of course, and spent time working in the summers with my dad, who died unexpectedly in 1975, and I'll tell that story in just a couple minutes. But I think the thing that was the thread, and has been the thread through at least the last 4 generations, is all of us were financial people. Finances and conservative financial values were just, ingrained or part of our DNA and learned from the previous generation. I think it's one of the reasons why we've existed in the business. The other thing is we've wanted to stay a single store. We didn't have any ideas about expanding. We like, maybe it fits our ability level, but we just like to do one store as best we can. We think it fits our financial goals as well, and we are hands-on and can dive deep in the management of the business and the relationships with customers, which we enjoy. And I think it's been, again, one of the reasons we've lasted so long. The last reason, which we'll get into later, is all the good people we've had that have worked with us as co-workers in this endeavor, and that exists to today, and I'll get into that. The interesting thing about my father, he was a World War II vet, came back in 1946, and Main Street building, and they refurbished it to harvester standards of the time. And he traded for horses onto H's and M's, and very aggressive salesperson, and really built the business. And there was huge consolidation when he started. Every little town had a harvester dealer, and when it was over, he was the only one left in a county, and now we're the only dealer of any brand left in our county, our home county. We also service surrounding counties, but I learned a lot from him. He was an aggressive salesperson, yet very financially strong, had a tremendous memory, and was also a one price. Before that, maybe technique was popular, but he was doing so much business, he didn't have time to mess around with it. He was very direct, and so he would give the customer one price. And he had a memory. He didn't write a lot of this down. He would remember it a year later. Had customers that say they asked about a specific piece of equipment, maybe it's selling a lot for a long time, and they thought a year later the price would have been discounted or whatever, and he would instantly remember the price he gave him a year previous and said it hadn't changed. So he was bullheaded that way. Another story that I loved, I've heard from an existing customer a couple times, is they were going to buy a tractor in a disc harrow and thought that maybe there'd be a discount from buying 2 pieces of equipment at the same time. And so when they asked my father Elwood about it, he gave him a piece of paper and a pencil, and he said, "Here's the price on the tractor, here's the price on the disc. You can add them up together." So He had kind of a tough approach, very direct, but people liked him, and he sold just hundreds and hundreds of units of equipment for the harvester in our family, in our area, and had a reputation that my son Paul, even though he never knew him, because my dad died in 1975, Paul was born in 79, he hears these stories from customers yet today and feels like he knows him from that business connection. So that's been a lot of fun for me as well. But anyway, my dad died very suddenly. I graduated from the University of Nebraska, was going to Northwestern University's MBA program, probably going to go a corporate route, and he passed away. I was home on my last break before getting my MBA. Never went back to finish. My mom was 51, had younger brothers and sisters, a younger brother and sister at home, and so I stayed with the business. Have no regrets about doing that. Built a new building a couple years later, and for my wife Lori and I, it worked out to be the right decision. But being around him really influenced me in many ways, and so I think about him all the time, and I really appreciate that connection. One of the next questions is, what about other families involved? And it really wasn't uncles or whatever. It's just been this one family tree. But there are two women I want to mention in particular that, as family members, had an influence. My grandmother Pankonin, after my grandfather died in 1960, I remember she stayed and did the accounting for my dad through her death in 1966, and I know he relied on her. And then my wife Lori, after my dad died, we were engaged. Huge change in what our plans were, from maybe living in Chicago area or Omaha to come back to a small town. But she was from a small town in northeast Nebraska. Her dad was a veterinarian, so she was used to people having long hours and small business. And she's been a tremendous partner and did the accounting work initially until we had our family, then returned about 20 years ago and still active in the business. And, spouses working together, sometimes that doesn't work. In our case, it has worked tremendously, and she's been an asset and knows so much about the business, and the customers like her. And so that's been, I'm proud of her, and just appreciate her being a part of this business for so long. The next question would be about the most interesting decade. And for me, where I started in 1975, the times were good. Agriculture was very strong, like a period we went through not too many years ago, but it was really strong. In 1979 was the year where the peak amount of equipment was sold out of our dealership, as far as quantities of over 100 horsepower tractors. The axial flow combine had really hit its stride. And I know we sold 24 new combines that year, and just about every one of them was a trade-in of a different brand, a lot of John Deeres and Masseys and whatever, as that product became so preeminent in the farms in the Midwest, and we'll get into the combine a little bit later as well. But that was it was fun, and then it was followed by the 1980s, which were severe change for not only the harvester company, but it was because of farm incomes had just plummeted. And now we've just come through a reverse of that, or another segment of that, in that we had in 2014 a peak and now a big drop. But I think from going through the 80s also was preparatory. This industry in agriculture is cyclical. And I learned from then. We made it through the 80s. And those lessons were, again, valuable to teach my son as we went through this recent period. And I think we've come out of it even stronger, knowing what you need to do when you go through a downturn. Your opinion, the most interesting product provided the most benefit, most in demand, and most innovative. Well, there's just no doubt about it, the axial flow combine. Our dealership was able to get one of the first 300 when they were introduced in 1977. We traded for a John Deere 7700 combine. A prominent farmer who had previously run red combines and switched to green was the ideal person, and we just got off to a running start with that product. And it is still, it's the reason we're still in business today. As agriculture has changed, that product is one we work on all year long. It made differences in our facilities. In fact, we're building an additional building in our facility campus because of the combine, and being able to store them off season, so when customers can bring them in, we can overhaul all year long, because that product has a historical market share in our trade area of over 50%, meaning that if you look at the maps, all the combines, all the customers out there, that product might not be year to year, but over an accumulation of years, we can demonstrate and we can show that on these farms, over half the combines are axial flows, partly because they can go back to even the 1400s. There's a handful of those still left, and there's no other brands that have lasted as long. The combine was easier to maintain, simpler, and it just revolutionized the industry. Eventually, everybody followed with a single rotor. So that product it is far and away made a big difference. That leads into most interesting, some of the IH executives or people we worked with in the company. Because of the combine, would have to mention Jerry Salzman as someone who we always enjoyed seeing, and I was on a combine advisory council for years, and just always enjoyed seeing Jerry at meetings, and especially remember the 1995 introduction of the 2100 series, and he had so much to do with that, and subsequently on the harvest business until he retired. Secondly, I thought about Don Lennox, who led the company through its most difficult time as it was separated into two halves, and they both could have disappeared if not for his hand at that time, and being able to get the agriculture business over to Tenneco, and then the truck business was able to continue under his initial leadership. So I think about him. I maybe met him a time or two, but I think he had a huge part in the time I was with the company. And then as far as people calling on us, the old names of blockmen and area managers and the salespeople that have called on us, my favorite would be Jim Ring, who called on us for years, and we had a real affinity for him, and Lori enjoyed him as well, and oftentimes we'd end up at lunch at our home in Louisville, and Jim was very good to us as well. And when he helped shepherd us when the company in 1985 on the agricultural side were picking 50 dealerships to honor, we were able to be one of those 50 dealerships. I know Jim helped us attain that honor, and it was a great celebration before we ended up separating, or the company, we went to Tenneco. Talking about McCormick or IH leaders of the past that we admire, I think Alex Leahy, who was a Nebraskan and was prominent in the company, that wasn't a member of the McCormick family, but really it was a great leader and a great public servant through his career. But I think he's one that I've read his book and just always have affinity to him because of being a Nebraskan. Vaughn asked the question about interesting customers or customers you've served and why. Well, when you've been in business since 1883 and you've had these, our business, the agricultural business, is very relationship based. Unlike the car business or even the truck business, our customers have maybe a whole line of equipment, or mostly they do, and so they might have 20 pieces of your line on their farm, in their farm operation. So these relationships oftentimes are multi-generational, and I've got this book of Lee Clancer's new book on four-wheel drive tractors, and a picture on page 356 of Arlo Flashman, Jake Flashman in a 450 Steiger four-wheel drive tractor is just a perfect example of so many customer relationships. Arlo's my age within a couple months. Jake is similar age to my son. Arlo's father, Walt Flashman, was my dad's contemporary and good friends and customers. And then the father of this family was also then a contemporary of my grandfather. So 4 generations that kind of matched up. Great picture, fine folks. Arlo was in the store yesterday with one of his combines, and we couldn't get out there right away, so he just drove it in, knowing that that probably would get him a little further up on the list. But there's so many, but I want to mention a couple others that are favorites. A gentleman by the name of Frank Stander, who's now deceased, but was a great customer. Got combines every other year and just a full line of red equipment all through the years. And he was also just a personal friend. He liked to come in the dealership and hang around, and he was out combining. And one night here 2 or 3 years ago, I called him, And we just, I don't know, it was kind of out of I don't know, something just led me to call him. And we ended up talking for 45 minutes that evening. It was 9 o'clock. He was harvesting corn, which he loved to do. His 2 sons were in the field with him, one in the semi, one in the grain cart. And we talked about our relationship and how much he enjoyed working with his sons. And I got a call the next morning, and he had gone to the combine the next morning, greased it, and he tried to go up the ladder and fell over dead. I was the last one besides his wife to talk to him. So that's the type of connections we have with our customers, and we go to a lot of funerals of the generations that have passed, and because we have relationships with the sons and daughters, and so that part of it is so rewarding. Just a couple other things to mention. Back in the day when I started, this doesn't happen so much anymore, but we had customers that were so trusting. A couple of them I'll mention. Howard Heesh, who when he traded something, his used piece was on the lot, and if it didn't sell within a matter of a couple weeks, he was back up at the store saying, well, you must have made a bad deal. I need to pay you more difference because I just don't like the fact that you're holding that used piece. You need to get it sold. And he would want to try to give you more money. And another guy that I remember who came in, and Johnny Schaefer, it was a 5088 tractor used, and had another customer in my office, and John was at the door and said, Dave, is that a good 5088 tractor? I said, I think it's a good tractor, Johnny. It'll work for you. And he said, well, I'll just take it, bring it out. And the customer sitting in the office said, he didn't ask the price. And I told that guy, I said, Jim, nobody ever asked me the price except for you. But just the fact that we had customers of that generation, my dad did too, who bought equipment, it was delivered, and might even be a week or two later that we got them an invoice, and they had never asked the price, knowing that because of the relationship, you'd be fair with them. And really, that was pretty smart, because do you think you were going to take advantage of somebody that trusted you like that? So that is some of the stories we have about customers, and we could go on and on. There's so many that we're so close to. Next question is best and longest serving employees that you've had. Well, that one is, we can go on and on because we've had so many. Currently, our dealership has 18 employees, most full-time and some part-time included in that. 9 out of those 18 have been with us for over 40 years. And 4 out of those 9 had previous generations that worked at the dealership for decades. So I think that has been a huge strength besides our financial focus and our customer relationships, is we've had these long-term employees. I call them co-workers because that's the way we approach it in getting the job done. And we've had, unusual for a small business, our retirement plan is totally funded by the dealership. It's a defined contribution, but it's not a matching. We put in all the money. I think that's been a factor. We've been generous on the health insurance, which is tough for small businesses, but these people are like family, and I think the loyalty they've shown, and we can depend on them, and I think they can depend on us, is another factor that we've been in business for that length of time. So to mention a couple of them would be very difficult because there's been so many, but I think those facts stand alone there when half your staff has been with you for 40 years. And actually that's a challenge for Paul now to, as we think about all the time, to replicate that over the next few years so he can replace people. I will mention that we have a part-time employee, Les Savak, that has worked for the dealership since 1960. He was an 8th grader. He's now over 70. Still comes in and sweeps on Saturdays. He was a school teacher, shop teacher in the area, and drove truck for years on any time he could. And he still loves to come in and hang around. And so I call Les the longest serving part-time employee in America. When you've started in 1960 and you're still actively working. So that's someone that's fun to mention. The next question was how the culture has changed your community. How's it impacted your business? Louisville was never an ag center per se versus a lot of small towns. It wasn't a county seat, didn't have a big grain elevator or whatever. So there was a big cement plant there, and so it's a little different flavor than from a lot of towns in the Midwest. But obviously, as growing up, there was still a lot of farm kids, and now there's very, very few. And that's true really in the countryside. Obviously, with mechanization, there's not as many people growing up on the farm. And so finding employees that have had that background is going to be more of a challenge. I think it's still possible to do that, but most of our employees have had that background, and obviously it's important to do that. But it's still been a good life living in a small town, and we're fortunate we're close to the Omaha and Lincoln metro areas, so we have those amenities. But there is something about living in the country, having those relationships with the customers. So it's different, but still similar. One of the Vaughn's last questions was your impression about C&H and Navistar today. What is the public perception of these companies? Well, on the ag side, obviously we've had a huge competitor over the years in John Deere, and they've got they're the strong number one in the industry, and we're a strong number two. But obviously they've had so much stability, and I actually think, and Paul and I talk about that I think it's somewhat remarkable that with all the changes on the ag side, there's been several companies that have been under this umbrella after International Harvester was out of the business. But we still have a good position. I think it's because of there's some products, particularly the combine and four-wheel drive tractors, that are leaders, have leadership positions. But also I think it's been because the Harvester dealer organization had so many strong dealers that's allowed C&H to still compete. When we've combined with Case and New Holland, the old Harvester dealers are still the backbone of that dealer organization, and I think those relationships with customers have still made a difference. Why, but despite different owners, that it's still relevant and a strong overall number two in the industry. And in many areas like ours, where I think we're so strong in the combines, it's because of that product and the dealer organization that has had maintained those relationships with customers. And on Navistar, we still are loyal. Our trucks and our organization are Navistar trucks, and sure enjoy our ProStar semi, and I'm proud to have it. And I think, again, that organization it's got the largest dealer organization in the industry. And I know, again, relationships with customers, a little different on the trucking side, but still that means a lot to a lot of people. And the product has stood the test of time in many areas. And so, I think I'm proud to have that historical association with the Navistar company and International Trucks, and always will be. I like to read about it, the history, as I do on the ag side. So I think it's been a remarkable story, and one that our country has made a difference in our country and our world as well. These products, the people involved, the factories that I visited, always enjoyed, and I just still love the business. And so many of the dealers too, I was 23 when my dad died, and people that took me under their wing, the Bob Catons and Larry Toners and George Hamiltons, and longtime dealers that were so good to me. So still have had relationships with those people until Larry Toner's still alive. Talk to him on a regular basis. He's 20 years older than I am, but that has always meant a lot to me too, the other dealers and that sort of thing. So I do want to show this is our company logo, and in March this year we're going to celebrate, or this winter, in an open house. This is a hat we had commissioned that talks about the 5 generations since 1883, our company logo and the Case IH logo on the side. So I think our customers will enjoy that. We did recently pick up a new area where a Titan store closed at Wahoo, Nebraska, and so it's really been fun this year. We've picked up about 60, 70 new accounts, and it's made a difference in our business. And those people are brand loyal. I think we'll hold on to most of them, and it's been an uptick for our dealership as well. So we're looking forward to that open house this winter to celebrate 135 years in the business, and hopefully many more. Our son is under 40, and he loves the business for a lot of the same reasons, and I think we'll be serving this area for decades to come, and looking forward to that. So I want to thank Vaughn for coming out from Chicago to do this interview, and hopefully it's something that'll help in preserving the history of the Harvester Company and the industries we've served, and what it means to be a part of this legacy. So thank you, Vaughn.